Foreign Policy Talk Series, which is a joint initiative of the Center for International European Studies and the International Relations Council of Turkey Panorama, where basically it's Mustafa, Aydin, and myself that have been doing these events for a while, inspired, or I don't know whether it's good to be inspired anymore because of the pandemic and everything is on Zoom. And so we just thought that it would be an interesting discussion to have about what everyone is talking about. You had the elections in the US, and I can imagine that in every national capital, everyone is talking about what does this mean, right? Does this mean greater US re-engagement? And what sort of engagement into our affairs, in particular, since there's been 4 years since Biden was vice president and was engaged. So what does it mean? And in particular, what does it mean for Turkey and its neighbors, given the variety of issues that emanate from that? Now, we are going to have 4 speakers. One of them will be joining us shortly. Let me briefly introduce them. Nathalie Tocci, the director of the Istituto Affari Internazionali in Rome and an honorary professor at the University of Tübingen. She's also special advisor to the EU High Representative Josep Borrell, a position she had previously also when the High Representative was Federica Mogherini. And of course, Nathalie, as everybody knows, drafted the global strategy and worked on its implementation. And she has held a number of other positions, but I think this is enough to go on. Everybody knows who our speakers are. Ian Lesser, the Vice President of the German Marshall Fund of the United States, a member of GMF's executive team, as well as the Executive Director of the Brussels office of the GMF. And Ian, a long time friend, has been previously worked at the Woodrow Wilson's International Center for Scholars, RAND Corporation, the Pacific Council out in the West Coast. He has also been, was a member in the 90s of the Secretary's Policy Planning Staff at the US State Department, responsible for Turkey, Southern Europe, North Africa, and a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and many other associations and organizations. Mustafa Aydin, my partner in crime in this venture, the president of the International Relations Council of Turkey, and a colleague, a professor. We are both colleagues at the Department of International Relations at Kadir University, where between 2010 and 2018, Mustafa was the university president and my boss. Thank God he's not my boss anymore. And actively engaged. I mean, Mustafa is rapidly becoming sort of the dean of international relations in Turkey. He's taking over from older generations and very active through his International Relations Council, trying to mobilize, generate scholarship on foreign policy issues, international relations, Turkey foreign policy, and also bringing younger generations. And our last speaker, who will be joining us shortly, let me just quickly introduce her, Dorothee Schmid, another old friend. Actually, I first came to Turkey in 2002 with Dorothee. I was a research fellow at the EU Institute for Security Studies in Paris. Dorothee was a visiting fellow. It was the year that she actually joined IFRI. She's the head of the Turkey and Middle East Studies program at IFRI, the Institut français des relations internationales, or there she is, in Paris, and has been leading the program since 2008. Hi, Dorothee.
Yeah, hello.
So I was just introducing you, Dorothee.
I heard it. That's why.
So we will actually go, as I was talking to the speakers before we start, we'll start with Ian Lesser, and then I'll give the floor to Nathalie, then Dorothee Schmid, and then to Mustafa. They will make brief interventions at the beginning based on a series of questions that I've sent them, and then we'll get into a discussion. We'll be taking your questions in the chat function of Zoom, and those following us on Facebook can actually put them up on Facebook, and I will be looking at them and passing them on to the speakers. Ian, the floor is yours.
Dimitri, thank you very much. I mean, it's nice to be here with a lot of friends, old friends, and very nice to be talking about the whole question of what a Biden administration's foreign policy could be like. Because you know, if we had had this meeting a few weeks ago, we wouldn't have been sure that that was what we'd be talking about. So you know, this is actually, for Americans who may be listening, this is of course Thanksgiving. Let me say that in some ways this is an analytic Thanksgiving as well. A couple of thoughts about this generally. The first, is a kind of an obvious point, and I think it absolutely comes out when you look at the sort of early appointments to the cabinet and some other key foreign policy positions, that I think that Joe Biden is likely to be the most naturally foreign policy minded president that we've had in recent history. There are others who have had that thrust on them for different reasons. I think particularly of Bush most recently, but really not since maybe George H.W. Bush, where we have a president who feels so at home in the international environment and actually takes a strong interest in all of this as a policy concern. That is really going to make a big difference. The style will be completely different. This is an obvious point, but the interest, the knowledge, the experience, the networks, all of that stuff will be potentially very foreign policy oriented. Now, having said that, there are immense domestic public policy challenges which will absorb the administration's energy for some time to come. I mean, and we know what those things are. But I mean, it's quite notable that the foreign policy appointments were the very first ones to be trumpeted by the administration. And, there could be lots of reasons for that. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I do think that Biden is going to be a natural fit for this world. And certainly people like Tony Blinken and others, Jake Sullivan, I mean, these are really a return to the known world. Now, there are those in Washington who will say this is a return to what they, sarcastically refer to as the blob. Obama was quite scathing about this even towards the end, about the foreign policy establishment and the sort of canonical solutions that it would come with and all of this kind of thing. I think after 4 years of Trump, most people in these circles would say, bring back the blob. That would be very welcome. People who know the issues, who know the president well, where there's some continuity, all of that stuff, and a very different style. So I think that's what you're going to get. It is really the return of the traditional foreign policy elites, very Atlanticist ones at that, actually. I mean, I find that, and I would say this maybe from GMF, all very good news. I think it's important, secondly, to note for our discussion that this is likely to be an administration that, for all of these domestic policy distractions, is going to pay more attention to what is going on in and around Europe. I mean, Trump arguably saw the world, and his circle saw the world not just through individual nation states, but individual leaders, in fact, good or bad, as they saw it. I think this is an administration that is, well, do that naturally, they all do, but this is an administration that's going to take institutions seriously. The EU, NATO, other multilateral institutions, UN agencies, all of it. They're going to be sort of brought back from the darkness, and that too augurs for a kind of return, maybe not to exactly the same kind of multilateralism, which was troubled anyway. You've got to sort of reinvent that stuff, and you just can't have resets. The world has moved on, but certainly in terms of a lot of the style and a lot of the substance, it will be, from an American perspective, I think, a reset, a return to the known world. What are the things that are more structural and open questions still? Well, the rise of China, all of that stuff, the increasing attention to the Asia-Pacific region, the Indo-Pacific, I mean, the end maybe of a 100-year American pivot to Europe. I mean, that stuff is all structural. Again, the style will be different, but it would not take much to happen over Taiwan or in the South China Sea to accelerate all of that. That's structural, I think. The search for the exits in places like Afghanistan and Iraq is going to go on, maybe with a different tempo, maybe in a little more measured way, more consultation, all the rest of it, but headed for the exits nonetheless. I think there's a bipartisan consensus about that. More NATO-centric, not just taking the EU more seriously, but more NATO-centric. And maybe that will have implications for the East Med in particular. It's not to say that there won't be differences. I mean, especially on issues like trade and other regulatory issues and so on, there could still be very big differences. But, it's one thing to argue about differences. It's another thing to have the kind of debates that we had during the Trump administration about whether the United States is really engaged in the world and cares about Europe or all the rest. I think that's going to change. Now, just finally, some specifics briefly about Turkey and the region. A lot of things, mostly continuity, but I could imagine. Let me start with Turkey. I think the consensus view both in the United States and Turkey seems to be that this is going to be even more troubled. That the Biden administration, in addition to that long list of differences that are already on the table, from S-400s to other things, is going to focus on much more heavily on issues of democracy, human rights, media freedom, all sorts of things that are going to be problematic in the discussion with Turkey, but also potentially with others inside NATO, with Hungary or with Poland or with others. So this is going to be tough. Biden has already said some quite tough things about Turkey. That said, administrations come in wanting to fix things. They don't, generally speaking, want to make things worse. And the relationship with Turkey bilaterally was already in a very bad place. And there probably would be a window, at least, to try to be more creative and fix at least some of the things that are key differences between Ankara and Washington. We can talk about what some of those things are. It's basically a much tougher outlook. But let me also say this, in addition to wanting to fix things, this is also an administration that is likely to use very different language about the Muslim world. I have to imagine that will be well received in Turkey. It's an administration that's going to have a different view about the nuclear issue with Iran and about coming back into the JCPOA. This is going to be meaningful for Turkey as well. So there is a space there. In addition to things that will get tougher, there could also be things that could facilitate a better dialogue between the two countries. No question, there'll be a continued a deepening of what is already a very deep relationship with Greece on security and defense issues. It's never been better. And to the extent that the relationship with Turkey doesn't get fixed, it's not fixable, whatever you want to say, I think there will be more of a search for hedges against a dysfunctional relationship with Turkey. I'm not predicting that, but I think that'll be on the agenda. I could say more, but maybe we'll save it for the discussion about Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Israel, Russia's role. There's a lot to say on those fronts, but maybe I'll leave it at that, Dimitri. Thank you. I think you may be muted, Dimitri.
Yes, I am. I will not ask you a question, actually. I have many, but let's move on to Nathalie, and then we'll get to questions at the end. Nathalie.
Thanks, Dimitri. And let me try and, in a sense, add or complement what Ian was saying, with which I completely agree, by looking at how all this plays out from a European angle, and therefore what the implications for Turkey and for the region might be. Now, I would sort of start off by saying that the reason why this election has been so significant for Europe has been, firstly, this is basically, democracy has been at stake in the United States, and ultimately the fate of democracy in the United States is consequential for democracies everywhere else, obviously including Europe. So that's the sort of first and most fundamental reason. And secondly, the change from the Trump administration to a Biden administration is and will be so consequential, I would say not necessarily because of the policy disagreements that there have been with the Trump administration, which obviously have been fairly significant on a number of issues. But let's face it, I mean, we've had, in many respects, more acute disagreements, policy disagreements in the past. I mean, just think of how acrimonious the transatlantic relationship was, back in the early 2000s in the context of the war in Iraq. So perhaps because the Trump administration didn't start new wars, in a sense, that has been one of the most potentially acute sources of division, which in a sense has been subtracted from the equation. So it's not really been about policy as much. it's been really for the, due to the fact that for the first time in the history of the transatlantic relationship, Europe was not viewed as family. In fact, it was kind of viewed as adversary. It was viewed as enemy. It was viewed as basically being on a par with the likes of Putin and Xi Jinping. And in fact, in some respects, even worse, because, there was a certain chemistry that kind of worked with authoritarian leaders that wasn't quite there when it came to the likes of Merkel or Macron or von der Leyen for that matter. So this is, in a sense, this being treated as family, being viewed as family, once again, is probably the most significant change that will sort of take place and is already taking place in the coming weeks and months. Now, 3 points that I wanted to make in terms of more practically what this changes and what doesn't, and what the implications may be for Turkey and the region. The first point is, there will be a number of areas where the United States and Europe will really start basically playing on the same team once again. And these are broadly, I would say, big global issues. So they're issues that do not relate to Turkey and to the region. So priority number one is obviously COVID response and coordination over pandemic response, which, as we know, was an impossibility with the Trump administration, and now is going to be, in a sense, the first priority for the Biden administration, is already the first priority for the European Union, and therefore working together on this is basically what we're going to see happening. Now, this connects also to the economic piece of the equation, and therefore coordination over the economic recovery. And I think we're going to be seeing a lot of this in the context of three key multilateral formats, G7, G20, and I would add COP26, given that on both sides, and this brings me to the third aspect, to the third point, because of big global question, which the United States and Europe will be working on, which of course is climate change, and a key third multilateral format where I think we are going to be seeing the US and Europe working hand in glove is going to be COP26. And that triptych, G7, G20, COP26, which incidentally are all going to be chaired by Europeans, Italy and the UK, are I think going to really represent a sort of a set of multilateral frameworks where we're going to see a strong transatlantic cooperation. And all this is going to be the priority for, I would say, the best part of 2021, 2022, and perhaps even beyond, which means that the priority is not going to be the Eastern Mediterranean and Turkey and Cyprus and Greece. Now, second point where I think that there is going to be, which brings us closer to our region, whether we're going to see a difference is, although the Eastern Mediterranean, Turkey, I would add, Middle East, all of the EU surrounding regions are not going to be a main priority, I think, for the Biden administration. At the same time, I think that there will be close coordination with Europeans on all of these matters. Now, we have seen in a region like the Balkans over the last few years just how damaging a lack of coordination is. So when Europeans and Americans work at cross purposes, a lot of damage can be done. So even if we're not going to see a massive re-engagement of the United States in the EU surrounding regions, the very fact that that coordination will be re-established is going to be consequential. And I think this is going to be the case in the Balkans. I think it's going to be the case in Libya, where we're going to start seeing, at the very least, a little bit of coherence coming from Washington in terms of what is it that the United States would like to see happening, and what is it that they expect Europeans to do on that front. When it comes to the East Med as such, here I actually think that the US may play a slightly more proactive rather than second fiddle role, for the simple reason that the EU, for obvious reasons, has, in a sense, both its hands tied, and it has a structurally imbalanced role when it comes to EastMed. And I think the kind of, if we kind of rewind back a few weeks and we see the sort of, facilitation that was attempted by NATO's Secretary General together with Germany over the question of, deconfliction, re-establishment of direct talks on the EastMed. I would imagine that in that kind of situation, moving forward, we would see a sort of more proactive US role in terms of sort of crisis management, not necessarily resolution, but at the very least crisis management. Much in the same way, obviously, I would imagine there to be, and there already is, close coordination between the Biden team and Europeans when it comes to the JCPOA. And I think this is, certainly for the first 6 months of the administration, in terms of where is it that you coordinate when it comes to surrounding regions with Europeans, this is going to be the #1 priority, for the simple reason that time here really is of the essence. I mean, we know that if we are going to get anything done on the JCPOA in terms of easing the US's way back in to the agreement and sort of getting into a compliance for compliance momentum, progress needs to be achieved before the Iranian presidential elections in the summer. Last aspect, which I think is going to have an impact on Turkey and the region, and Ian touched on this as well, is everything that sort of falls into the democracy and human rights box. So, this has been an area where obviously Europeans and Americans have not been playing in a very coordinated fashion over the last 4 years, for the simple reason that clearly this was not a priority for the Trump administration. A Biden administration will take issues of, related to democracy, to human rights, to rule of law, to international law far more seriously. And obviously this will have implications in terms of policy towards Turkey in particular. Which may have, and here I'd be very interested to hear what Mustafa has to say. I'd be interested to hear the extent to which this may already be factored in Ankara. I mean, sort of expecting greater coordination across the Atlantic on Turkey. To what extent is it, or may it already be having a mitigating effect in the sense on Turkey? So I think that when it comes to some aspects, taking at heart democracy and human rights may even create, at times, not Turkey related, on some issues, perhaps even greater potential for confrontation. I mean, think US-China, taking more seriously democracy and human rights issues or international law issues is obviously going to exacerbate the US-China confrontation. So it's not as if it's all, necessarily, in the direction of greater reconciliation. But I think this will be, I think that when it comes to these questions, the US and the European Union really are going to be, again, playing very much on the same team. And whereas in a case like China, it may exacerbate conflictuality. My hunch is, but again, I'd be interested particularly to hear what Mustafa has to say on this. My hunch is that when it comes to the EastMed and when it comes to Turkey, this is actually good news. And I'll stop there, Dimitri, for the time being.
Well, thank you, Nathalie. It's interesting. Both you and Ian do not necessarily talk about. Yes, it's repairing the relationship. It's how to re-engage or engage with the Europeans, but it seems to be a continuity, which is repairing the relations as opposed to maybe accounting for systemic change or systemic disorder, which is also compounded, as a Turkish interlocutor reminded me this afternoon in a workshop I attended, that this is also happening within Turkey itself, institutionally, the systemic change or disorder, and therefore how this would account for the relations. But I can leave this. You can answer this later. Dorothee, let's hear what you have to say.
Bonjour
Hello.
Dimitri. Can you hear me? Is that okay? Okay. So a different view from Europe, maybe, because I fully agree with you that we have to take into account this sort of systemic change towards systemic disorder. So my 4 points will be on, first, the frame. That's what we've just been alluding to. Then Europe, the Middle East, and Turkey specifically. So we all shared an immense sense of relief, I think, in Europe. But then, shall we say that we're back to normal? What's normal these days? That's the first problem. I think we all tend to talk like without taking into account the consequences of COVID, the massive economic consequences that we have, massive economic crisis, financial crisis, bankruptcy that we can expect here and there within the countries and more systemically. And I think that's very important. So not only Trump, but the context has worsened. I mean, not only Trump has made the world worse, but also the context has degraded clearly. What really struck me these days is that the first opinions that I saw, the first op-eds that I could read that really took my attention in Europe, said basically that we should learn to live without the US. We can do without the US. We've taken this habit, and we needed this Trump shock to be able to work on our autonomy, strategic autonomy, normative autonomy, I would say also. So I don't see, I see a sense of relief because the previous administration is going and nothing was possible in terms of daily work. But I see the priorities are not going back to what they were earlier. And I think it'll be quite difficult for some protagonists to restore trust and normal links. So I don't think we can reverse everything, and we will need a lot of creativity. So what's good is that we see this new American administration, seen from this side of the Atlantic, looks very energetic. I mean, people want to invent new forms. They know that they cannot do with the former system of institutions that were maybe a little sclerotic, and they have to move forward into new forms of multilateralism, etc. The other worry that we have in Europe was that the new administration, American administration, will have to work on the domestic context. They would have to mend the American society, and they would not have that much time, resources, etc., to devote to international relations. And then we realize that the elected president is one of, arguably, that has, like Ian has said, the most deep international experience that we've seen for any American president in the last decade. He's interested in that. He knows about the international context. He will probably have a very competent team. So we can expect them to actually do work a lot on international issues. But I was also very interested to see that he claims that he wants to restore American leadership. This is not making America great again by itself for itself, but this is talking about American leadership. And don't forget that we in Europe bear the consequences, for instance, of the US-China tensions that have risen over the last mandate. So I do not necessarily see this reaffirmation of American leadership as something easy to deal with for Europe. So if I move to my second point, which is Europe, we can see that there's actually an equal satisfaction, depending on the political side you are in, depending on your country. The Germans, they look totally orphans, you know, they're so enthusiastic with these new teams. You realize how much they suffered with the Trump administration. And I would say the French are more nuanced, because clearly we need partners. But I think Macron, up to a certain point, sees some opportunities with the void that was created by all the approximations of the previous American leadership. And he could arrange specific initiative for France specifically. And I do not see him necessarily acting as EU, which is important. So I mean, Macron does need also leadership for himself. He needs it also in order to be re-elected in France. That's a domestic issue. But I think he still wants to affirm leadership. I was, for instance, very impressed at the way he coped with the Lebanese crisis, like absolutely not coordinating with the Germans. So I see this Franco-German divide very strong on transatlantic matters. And you see the German Minister of Defense basically said, okay, we're done with strategic autonomy. We don't need it anymore. The Americans are going to take our security in charge again. So, and I don't think the mood is this in Paris. I also see critiques of the Biden and the people he'll bring in within the French right circles. People thinking he's much too idealist. He's a leftist. This is bad. Like we know he's not the ultra leftist side, but I mean, Trump had some supporters within the French right as well. So especially because he was very erratic with Russia, and there is a strong Russophile sentiment in France, and probably because he behaved in a very strong manner vis-à-vis China. This being said, the titles, the front page of the Figaro today was like Antony Blinken, Francophone and Francophile. That's what matters. Stop, full point. Okay, so this guy knows France, speaks French, and you know, this is this idea of a sort of competition of leadership, even symbolically. When we come to the issues that we can work together, of course, multilateralism is a very important point. We're back to welding together an international society. We'll have a sense of cooperation, if not equality. NATO becoming a forum for political dialogue, again, that's very important. We realize that in the East Med, without NATO's efforts, I don't think de-escalation would have been possible between Turkey and Greece. And another point that's very important certainly for France, climate change, cooperation on climate change issues, the Paris Accord, etc. Now, if we come to the Middle East, what we see of the Middle East nowadays, the main problems we're facing, we Europeans, are more conflicts, more civil wars, maybe new conflicts in the making, some states collapsing like Lebanon. Second problem, Islamic terror, the return of the terror attacks on the European soil. Third main problem, refugees, Syrian refugees. So how do these three issues affect the Americans? Much less than us, clearly. I mean, the moon is to withdraw from the Middle East, not send too many troops there. So making peace, okay, getting involved into some peace deals, but how do you solve conflicts? We have to get together, certainly on that. Islamic terror is more a problem for the Americans, and I see there is a lot of wishful thinking, which maybe actually become a reality, that the Americans will re-engage on fighting ISIS and try to prevent the resurgence of ISIS, a strong one in Iraq and Syria. And refugees, I think, is an issue that we have to deal by ourselves, we Europeans. Because what I learned in the past is that the Americans' engagement in the Middle East was based on a few pillars, which was maintaining stability. We don't have stability nowadays. Ensuring freedom of circulation, especially for energy routes. If this administration is going for a more clean world, if they have their own energy autonomy, they will be less interested in the oil and gas business in the region. And securing the fate of Israel. Israel is done, and Biden is not going to move backwards on that. He will not retransfer the embassy to Tel Aviv. When we see that they have an agenda on human rights, I really doubt that this can be sustainable in practice in most Arab countries. So I see we'll have a continuity with what we saw with Barack Obama, that is talking of democracy, human rights, etc., and then engaging on security issues in a smarter way, probably in other forms. The places where I see some interesting intentions are Iran, just like been developed by Nathalie, and Iraq as well, because Biden seems to be more open to cooperation with Baghdad, especially if he wants to fight ISIS, and if he is more open to dialogue with Iran. So I see these two places as they have to be watched. They say they want to work on reconstruction in Syria. That's a big puzzle for me. Do we get rid of sanctions? What's the political solution? Does it mean that the Americans absolutely don't care about the political frame that will emerge in Syria? And the other puzzle for me is the very empathic, laudative even statements that the Biden as a candidate has made towards Islam, the Muslim world at large, which I think does not take into account the very big fault lines, and which will probably be a difficulty to actually manage in practice. I mean, maybe I say that because Macron has exactly the opposite attitude, you know, claiming every 5 minutes that the Islam and the religion crisis, and we have to acknowledge that, and they have to acknowledge that, etc. So I see Biden exactly on the opposite side. And on Turkey, I suppose we're all curious to see the type of animosity that Biden has shown in the past will stay with Erdogan. We've seen the end of the Barak administration, some very tense relationship actually at personal levels between the two presidents. And I don't think this really impaired in a very crucial way the importance of the link between the strategic link between Turkey and America. But again, Trump's mistake, erratic behavior, etc., gave more opportunities for the Turks, especially in the Middle East. So this is probably the end of it. I mean, we're back to a more serious picture. My problem, and I think the problem of many European analysts, is that we're all struggling on our relationship with Turkey. Should we cooperate with Turkey, contain Turkey? How do we contain Turkey? Should we contain Turkey by including them? And there I'm quite certain that the Americans will be back to their historical line of trying to mend the relationship between the EU and Turkey by more inclusion of Turkey into European frameworks and more cooperation between the EU and Turkey. And I'm afraid this does not match at present necessarily the immediate interests of the Europeans. Maybe Turks more, but I'm not sure it'll be that easy to convince Europeans that their strategic interests are not put in jeopardy by some of the very aggressive attitudes that the Erdogan's administration has. And I stop there.
Thank you, Dorothee, for very comprehensive sort of analysis, adding on to what both Ian and Nathalie have said. I mean, let me quickly give the floor to Mustafa. There's been a lot out there, Mustafa. How do you see things?
Thank you, Dimitri. Okay, let me start from a strategic or structural perspective, going beyond the Biden administration or who is the president in Washington. I believe that there is an underlying problem in Turkish-American relations, which would not be changing with the change of president in Washington. That underlying problem is we don't have a certain structure, a ground to build the relationship on. We used to talk about different types of structures in Turkish-American relations during the Cold War and immediately after the Cold War period in 1990s or even 2000s. but we have lost that ground. The paradigm, the old paradigm has shifted, and the new one is not settled in yet. There are so many reasons for this. We don't need to go into it, but systemic evolution is part of it. The shift in American interests from Middle East, Russia towards China and East Asia is another part of it. Divergence of interest of US and Turkey around Turkey's vicinity is another part of it. And I think divergence of threat perceptions are also a part of it. Turkey's threat perceptions are increasing the regional, no global threats perceived by Turkey, and most of the regional threats perceived by Turkey are not understood as threats by the United States. And of course, part of this is how we are dealing with the entities that we are calling terrorists or not. The US looks ISIS as an international terrorist organization, whereas Turkey thinks PKK is an international terrorist organization. In contrast, US has no problem with dealing with PKK affiliated organizations or even indirectly with PKK, why Turkey also does not attribute that much attention and importance to ISIS for coming back. So there are differences, structural differences here, and it's a big problem, I think. And also part of this is coming from the changing international geopolitics also, that Turkey might be not as geopolitically important as it used to be for the United States. I mean, I'm not comparing it not with the Cold War era. I'm comparing it 1990s. I think even 1990s, Turkey was much more important for the United States in different sub-regions of the world, in Central Asia, in Caucasus, in Black Sea, in the Balkans, in the Middle East. I think this is not a case anymore for a number of reasons, not always related to Turkey. So less interest from the US, more divergences on the interest and threat perceptions leads to what everybody talks about, this transactionalism in relationship. And this transactionalism, transactional relationships is problematic because you don't see 3-5 steps ahead. It's very volatile. Then it becomes dependent on domestic politics, dependent on the personality of presidents, dependence on structure of the Congress in the US, Turkish domestic politics, lots of things. So it becomes much more problematic and very difficult to predict for the future. In Turkey, of course, when the election period was going on, the government circles and people closer to government were not very happy, and they already showed that they would not be very happy to see a Biden administration, simply because they have this, I think, unfounded and misguided belief that Turkey had a very good relationship with Trump administration. I say misguided because it was very volatile, and I don't think we knew what to expect from the Trump administration. He helped Turkey on certain areas, especially delaying the Katsa problem for us, Katsa sanctions, and also making an opening in northeast Syria, east of Euphrates. So these two areas was quite well received in Turkey, but then he also made a couple of pronouncements, statements, sent a letter, a horrible letter. If you look at it, if you compare it with the infamous Johnson letter was a perfect. It looks like a wonderful letter from today when you compare Trump's letter. And of course, he threatened to ruin the Turkish economy. At one point, he also made some moves towards that too. So it was very volatile, very difficult to predict, and very difficult to sustain. But nevertheless, it seems the Turkish government preferred that. One of the reasons why they prefer Trump administration, because he provided his administration, himself actually, not even the administration, he provided a linchpin for Turkey to talk to in Washington. That brings me to the other part of the problem with Turkish-American relations, that Turkey is not able to talk anybody in Washington nowadays. Since now the Trump is going, it's become much more difficult. The traditional Pentagon, Turkish MOD relations, military to military relations are not going well since Iraq 2003, maybe even worse now. State Department is not that much interested in protecting Turkey or defending Turkey in the Congress, mostly to do with something to do with the Turkish domestic political developments and how people are seeing Turkey now. And also, it seems that Turkey has been now relegated in the State Department to the purview of Middle Eastern experts instead of where it used to be Europe. So there is this difference too. And of course, the Congress, I don't remember any time that Turkey's relations with Congress was bad, except in 1970s. So it's a very difficult situation for Turkey, and Turkey has to generate people and institutions to talk to in Washington. And of course, the prediction of the Biden administration giving much more important to institutionalization of the relations creates dreads in Turkey that now we have to talk to all these institutions. For me, I'm looking from a different perspective. I always favored institutionalization and going to institutions because they provide less uncertainty, more predictability. Even if we don't have good relations with American institutions at the moment, it will also give us a direction, and we will know what to expect. That was something lacking with the Trump administration and a bigger problem. I think the Biden administration, contrary to many expectations from Turkey or in Turkey, I would say, would not be coming towards Turkey with guns blazing. I agree with Ian that the administrations come to solve problems all over the world, not come to create more problems. So with Turkey, the Biden administration would start, I believe, with the kind of a benefit of the doubt. They will take Turkey case, look it over, and most probably talk with Turkey as well, and to see whether a movement or improvement is possible. From my perspective, the problem is the improvement is very difficult. That's the weakness, and that's the problem. Otherwise, not for lack of trying. I think the Biden administration will try, and I think Turkish government will respond in kind, trying to patch up the relationship. However, these structural problems that I mentioned earlier make it in the mid to long term not really possible to revive the relationship where it used to be in 1990s, for example, not going beyond. The biggest problem from the American perspective will be S-400s and Turkey's relations with Russia. S-400s is obviously already activated, but in name. And everything has been done, all the checkings and recheckings and the trainings, everything is there, everything in place, but the declaration of activation. And there is already a talk in Turkey to receiving a second bunch of S-400s. But nevertheless, Turkish government shows that it still understands what's important with the US, so that they kept delaying the announcement of activation. And I think they will wait to see what they can do with the Biden administration. The second problem or the first most important problem from the Turkish perspective would be US relations with Kurds in Syria. YPG would be the defining issue for Turkey to move ahead. So even this, the most important cases and issues in bilateral relations would be different from American and Turkish perspective. And for Turkey, any move would be conditioned with the US position clearer from the Turkish wording, clearer on YPG and the Kurds in general. That's really touches very raw nerve in Turkey. Not only the government, now it's kind of extend across the political spectrum. It touches every political party except the HDP, the Kurdish political party. But all the others seems to be, even the opposition are very on board with this issue. So apart from this, all the others are quite lesser issues: Libya, Ismet, Greece, and etc. I would expect, I think there is already some sort of a coordination behind the scenes with the US about Libya case. So it won't be too difficult to go ahead with there. And it's kind of put on the back burner. And in the Caucasus, of course, Turkey is only NATO ally have a saying in the Caucasus after the total failure of Minsk group. France definitely qualified it itself to say anything about Armenia and Azerbaijan, and that's only Russia there. So no other country in there, no Europe even there. It's only Turkey, if Turkey would do and could do anything. Of course, it's interesting, nobody is talking about Russia. We were in another webinar last week, Dimitri, you would remember, talking about the Caucasus, and everybody was looking, especially from the regional countries, they're all looking the US to develop a policy towards the Caucasus and the Black Sea, which would not be, it seems, not be very much high on the agenda of the United States. But there is a perspective, not very much talked about, but Turkey, Russia have an interesting dimension. Although Turkey and Russia have been cooperating quite a lot in different issues, and especially on Syria, you have to also see from a perspective that Turkey, in a sense, balancing, or at least trying to balance Russia in Syria, in Libya, and in the Caucasus. And it's the only NATO country who's doing that now. So if Biden administration are going to put more emphasis on NATO and maybe to have a relook on Russian case, that could be also a starting point, a good starting point for Turkish-American relations. Because let's remember, there are various reasons why Turkey move ahead with Russia, closer relations with Russia, but one of the most compelling reasons was S-400 and the closer relations was Syria. When Turkey parted, Turkey and US parted their ways in Syria, then Turkish-Russian relations really took off. Maybe finally, Biden was a person, remember, who came to Turkey after the July 15, 2016 coup attempt to pass the message of the United States. So he knows Turkey. He's been to Turkey for many times, and he knows the importance of the country to the United States. So I don't think, finally, let me say, I don't think that he would be coming just to repeat the policies of Obama's second period. And Turkey, I think, do understand that, and do understand that there might be more emphasis on the reforms and democratization from the Biden administration, and also Turkish economy forces the government towards giving more attention and importance to relations with Europe, to US, and also more reforms in Turkey. We'll see whether that will happen.
Thank you, Mustafa. I'm asking the audience to please ask their questions. We don't have a lot of time. We have about 10 to 12 minutes. But let me quickly ask, I mean, I'm sort of assessing everything everyone said. And I would tend to think that actually Turkey has a lot more leverage over both the incoming US administration and Europe than one would think. I mean, if the emphasis, one of the key points of the Biden administration is democracy, human rights, and so on, and values. And this is also something that the EU promotes, but basically they have no beef in the sense that if the accession process is where it is blocked, the EU has no instruments at hand to actually deal with a Turkey that's acting increasingly autonomously as an actor. The EU just had a strategic defense review, its first one, and it's very clearly stated there that it has tremendous failures and it needs to catch up in terms of what it does, in terms of having instruments of some sort of hard power to deal with challenges. So, so thinking a little bit both about, I mean, in particular about what Mustafa said about the structural change and how this is in place, it's going to be a very, very difficult sort of relationship as Ankara projects itself, you know, as a pretty independent, autonomous actor. I think this is something we need to keep in mind. There's a comment, I don't know if any one of you wants to respond to this right now. No? Yes? Okay. There's a comment, someone says that there's a need for regime change in Turkey. Okay, this is something to consider. Now, there is a question also from Vahid Güntay about, what do the speakers think about the Iran-Middle East equation in the new era of the, well, in terms of the Biden administration? I mean, I think some of the speakers have already, all of them have already sort of alluded to this. And so how to change the equation in terms of Turkey. Another question from Miti Raikut about, yes, the Biden administration in Israel and how this will affect Turkey-Israeli relations. Obviously, it's true, the comment that we heard that obviously the Biden administration is not going to take its embassy back to Tel Aviv. What's been done has been done. And it's going to embrace the Abraham Accords and so on. So we're working from there, from what we stand today. So how will this affect relations, which is really a big issue in Turkey proper, Turkey-Israeli relations, whether they can be repaired. And another one about correlation between Biden's victory and Erdogan's or the Turkish government's changing position vis-a-vis Europe. I think this is more tied into the forthcoming European Council. But who wants to tackle some of these issues?
Dimitri, I can take a sort of shot at some of these. I mean, first, perhaps to sort of come back to your question about, do we actually have any levers on Turkey? And I mean, yes, obviously the military one is not there, and indeed so the real stick is not there, and the real carrot is not there either, because of what you rightly said about the accession process. And yet, I do think that we do have important levers on Turkey that we have not been using. I think that it's been a strategic mistake for us as European Union to conduct the relationship over the last years precisely, on purely transactional terms, in a manner that has basically given all the bargaining chips pretty much to Turkey rather than the EU, namely on migration. And I think that we have been shooting ourselves on the foot by not opening negotiations over a modernized customs union. Now, the October European Council reopened that door once again, but the momentum is not exactly picking up as we move towards December. But I think that is precisely, I mean, it's obviously not as deep and as wide as the accession process, but it is a contractual basis for a relationship that does enable the EU to instill sort of rule of law principles within the confines of the relationship. Quickly on JCPOA and Israel. On JCPOA, I would say, as I said, I think, yes, this is going to be one of the main areas where we are going to be working together with the United States in the coming period. Let's face it, it's going to be easier said than done. I mean, once one gets into the nitty-gritty of what even a clean compliance for compliance intent looks like, it is not at all easy. And it is not at all easy, especially considering that the time available, as I was mentioning earlier, that we have in order to get to some concrete results, it is really 6 months, which is why I think that even between now and January 20th, it's going to be of crucial importance to do all the necessary mapping. And this is really homework that Europeans need to do, mapping of what the expectations and what the limits are, both on the Iranian side and on the US side, in order to really maximize that negotiation time between the end of January and the summer. Finally, on Israel and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, here I am not as, in a sense, pessimistic perhaps as you are, in an odd kind of way. I think that the Biden administration it has, in a sense, already signaled that this is not an area where they intend to sort of step back in as a big priority. And that is not necessarily a bad thing, given the real damage that has been done in terms of the paradigm shift away from, in a sense, a land for peace paradigm and towards a no annexation for normalization paradigm. So in a sense, if we were to sort of spearhead a new peace process on that basis, the damage done would actually be significant. So I think a sort of more hands-off, sort of do no harm approach in the current context may actually be more useful. And in an odd kind of way, the worst thing that we as Europeans can do is try and accelerate and push the United States into a peace process mode without having recreated, in a sense, healthier conditions for any process to actually get anywhere meaningful.
Dimitri, maybe if you allow me to just to come in on a couple of those things. I mean, on this leverage point, I mean, I think perhaps I might have gotten it wrong. The question was suggesting that the point was that Turkey could have leverage, and the question about Turkey's leverage in all of this. And I think Turkey has very little leverage in this over with the United States. I mean, the argument that somehow the relationship is too important geopolitically to ignore is a waning argument, frankly, because for a number of different reasons. First of all, there is such a strong, evident collapse of the strategic constituency for Turkey in Washington that this is going to be very, very difficult to repair, absent, first of all, settling the S-400 question. Now, maybe there's some marvelously creative way to do that. This has been done with S-300s in the past in a different setting. But if you don't fix that, I think the equation in Congress is going to be extremely difficult, especially because, as much as the Biden administration might want to get beyond this thing, they are likely to be much tougher on this, not so much because it's Turkey, but it's Russia that's in the equation. And, if there's anything that they want to run from, it was that ambivalence, that weird ambivalence that characterized the Trump administration's policy towards Moscow. And so I think, you need absolutely, it's the sine qua non to fix this, is to somehow take that off the table. I mean, that's too long a discussion to have here, but just having a technical working group around the problem is not going to do it. It's really going to have to somehow put a freeze on this thing and take it off the table. What does Turkey have to gain from this? Well, what can the US offer? Well, one thing the Biden administration can offer that the Trump administration was perhaps less prepared to do is to have the NATO context to give more attention to Turkey's insecurity, to Turkey's security concerns inside NATO as an institution. I mean, if the US re-engages in a serious way in terms of leadership in NATO, the US will be one of the most articulate about this, and could be. But unfortunately, the East Med situation really compounds the political problem for Turkey in Washington. I mean, lots of people care about this. In fact, Biden at one point was very engaged in this. Lots of people know about it. There is no sympathy for the Turkish policy at the moment. There may be some sympathy for the underlying arguments, legal or otherwise, but the current approach has no constituency in Washington. Zero. I'm prepared to say there is no one who's prepared to back this up. And certainly the risks of brinkmanship are widely acknowledged. So unless you can make now that maybe is an easier thing to freeze, but I think you need to do those two things in order to make any headway with the Biden administration coming in. It's a tall order.
It absolutely is. It absolutely is. But you know, it's very interesting because the East Med situation too. You keep talking about NATO, but the relationship, the enhanced relationship between Greece and the US and Greece and France in the East Med and the Aegean is really outside NATO. So it's very interesting how this is developing too.
No, you're absolutely right about that. And I know others want to come in, but
right.
I would go back to something that Dorothee said, which is, you know, this whole question of a more political NATO. You know, I mean, I think this Biden administration will be open to that. And I think it's very much in Turkey's interest because that's where Turkey has a full seat at the table.
Okay, well, let's see. There are many questions now. Let me just say a couple more and then give the floor to Dorothee and Mustafa and anybody else who wants to step in because we will have to end soon. There's a question on Facebook whether, Turkey and Erdogan's Turkey are perceived as one and the same in the Biden administration. And so if this is the case, or does it see the prospects under a different administration in Ankara? Okay, that's sort of the question. Then also there's a question where Mustafa is barred from answering, right? How would their particular countries of the US, Italy, and France therefore be affected by the enhanced or deteriorated relationship between the US and Turkey? I think some of it has already been answered. Another question by George Papapolichroniou. Wow, large Greek name. I'm having problem pronouncing. How autonomous of an actor can one country be when its economy are largely based on, it's true, FDI is principally coming from Europe. And so how you deal with this. But this has to do a lot, I think, with short term and long term. And, it's also true that all indicators, growth models show that Turkey is bound to grow economically, demographically, and so on in the future. And it will become at some stage a top 10 economy. So we have to factor that in. Anyway, Dorothee, anything you want to add, respond?
I was wondering about our leverage vis-a-vis Turkey. And I think this issue of the FDI is very important because we see a shortage of money globally. And I see very clearly from French investors the more risk aversion vis-a-vis Turkey. And I see investors coming out of Turkey because they don't trust the governance there. Not only because there is a sort of strategic political risk, but because they don't feel the country is legally stable, I would say. The institutions, the governance, the way the president uses the institution is seen as something producing instability. They don't trust the judiciary, etc. So I think all these flaws were probably enhanced in this climate of complete, disaggregation that was under the Trump administration. With everybody could do anything they wanted. We had a whole discussion about the customs union. We did a big project with the SVP on the modernization, upgrading of the customs union, and the conclusion was the Germans wanted to push the customs union as the number one instrument, positive instrument with Turkey. And basically all other countries had political restrictions. And then Macron came out and said, okay, we want to cancel the customs union, not even suspend it, but we don't want it anymore. So it doesn't work. But then looking into the technical details, you realize that we're in times of trade wars where everyone is behaving like if they were not actually constrained by this sort of agreements. So there, rising customs rates everywhere. They're putting new restrictions on trade. So in the end, you realize that maybe Turkey would have more of an interest of being in a free trade agreement than in a customs union with the EU, because it would have a say on the negotiation with the outside world, which is something it has claimed from the very beginning. So I think we do have a positive leverage on Turkey through FDI if everything goes back to a kind of normal, at least in terms of economic governance inside Turkey. And this may be actually reached under the very, very strong difficulties, changing parameters that we have post-COVID in the global economy. Everybody will have to adjust. Everybody will have to make an effort. So I'm quite confident that we can reach a stage of better agreement on economic matters with Turkey. But I don't think it will be done through the accession process, not even maybe through the customs union upgrading.
Okay, thank you. Actually, Ian has to leave to join another meeting, and I think Nathalie also. So do you have to add anything, any of you, the two of you, before I give the floor?
My thanks, and it's very, very good to be with you. This was a lovely discussion, and my apologies for departing a little bit early, but thank you again.
Same here. Thanks so much, Dimitri.
Thank you, Ian. See you soon, hopefully. Nathalie, à bientôt.
Thank you.
Yes,
Mustafa, lots of questions have been
so
asked.
I'm late with the Turks.
Yes.
Unbelievable.
Dorothee.
With the Turks, well, I'm a Greek, right? Don't forget that.
Sorry.
I don't think we have much to say. I mean, basically right now, I was just saying, we've lost a lot of our viewers also. Some of them are coming back on, but this was an interesting discussion, maybe to be continued at a later time, because it was very interesting. I think that there was actually divergence between a lot of your presentations. And I think there's a lot of food for thought there as to what is the way forward. And I think, interestingly enough, the three of us do not seem to assume that we are going back to the normal. The world has changed. And I think this is the basic thing. The Biden administration comes in at a time when it inherits things, whether it likes them or not. Yes, you deal with transactionalism, but things have changed fundamentally. And it's from here on, how do we move ahead? And I think this is going to be the interesting thing. And I think your perspective from Paris is very telling of that. And I think Mustafa, with his whole thing about structural change and the implications of that is telling. And really, how do you change your reflexes from transactionalism to something else? Because transactionalism, ultimately, I agree with Mustafa, it's not... you cannot have strategy come out of transactions.
Exactly. Yeah. It's very difficult. I mean, some people think that it's suited to Turkey, countries like Turkey, smaller but wants to be an autonomous in different regions. This allows kind of playing one actor to another. Short attention span from different actors helps to that, but in the long run, it's unpredictable. It's more unpredictability. It's not good for countries like Turkey either. It might look like beneficial in the short run, but in the long run, it's not. But I was just going to say only one point. With the questions, maybe the attendees are not here, but our response will be recorded and put on YouTube. So that's why I think Turkey had done almost everything that it wanted to do, or it's wanted to challenge. It challenged situations in Iraq, situation in Syria, in Eastern Mediterranean, in the Caucasus, and finally last week in Cyprus. So every argument are there, and the new administration has to pick up and respond to these. And I don't think Turkey would be in a position to creating more challenges. Now it's a time to negotiate from this forward presence in different areas. And of course, the state of Turkish economy also dictates that we should be closing some of the theaters of operations. I mean, the Caucasus seems to be frozen, refrozen for the foreseeable future. Libya seems to be on a track to a certain developments and not much place for continuing for fighting. Iraq is, if it's not reopened because of rise of ISIS, it's then okay. So this leaves, I think Eastern Mediterranean would not be that much a deal if United States shows more interest, because the EU already came to its limit of its influence in the Eastern Mediterranean, but US fresh look might tip the point there. And this really leaves, for me, at least for my mind, only Syria, which is, from the Turkish perspective, is an existential issue. That's why it's much more important than the others. There, we might need to see some sort of a flexibility from the United States. So that's what I wanted to say. Your sound, Dimitri. Dimitri, your sound.
Yes. Thank you, Mustafa. Dorothee, do you have anything else to add? And last words?
Yes, so two points, two last words. First, I agree that the fait accompli is a fact. So it's very important that Mustafa points out that Turkey has managed to challenge its partners on every issue. And now we have fait accompli, and we have to do with this. We have to find new solutions. And the second point was about the JCPOA, because I really wonder how, if we should, the basis to move forward is really this agreement, which was actually the result of a quite unique multilateral process that involved Russia and China. And China was a very important participant in the negotiation, because it was considered by the Iranians at the time as the the neutral one. But now we have this rising antagonism between the US and China, which will not make things easy to, put everyone around the table. So it's not only, the JCPOA is not only about Europe, Macron saying we want full implementation of the JCPOA, and this trust problem that we have with the US. Obviously, the Iranians are not going to trust any American administration that easily anymore. So I don't see where we start from. I think Iran is going to be a very difficult piece. I mean, the climate may be more conducive, but I don't see how we'll move forward. I find it very difficult.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, because I think Nathalie was saying that, yes, right now you take stock of where we stand, starting January 20 until the summer, we try to find a deal, and it seems a bit ambitious if it's actually possible. Because again, yes, this is the inheriting. You start again being engaged in a world that's fundamentally changing and has changed. Well, again, I would like to thank you all. I know you also have to go to another meeting, Dorothee. I'd like to thank you all. Dorothee, Schmid, thank you.
Merci. Thank you, Dimitri.
Mustafa, and of course,
thank you. Nice to see
Ian and Nathalie that are not here. We'll put on the video and try to the last part, put it on together so it's available for everybody. And hopefully we'll see each other again at a future event. Lots of food for thought here. And have a nice evening, everybody.
Thank you for organizing this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye, Mustafa. Ciao. À bientôt. Ciao.